Yeah.
And I'm saying the best student should be the one who gets into school.
I agree. So again, we go back to the beginning of this thing. I said it's not racist. And now I'm thinking maybe it could be.
Here is the latest installment of Change My Mind, where we rationalize our positions on controversial topics. In our last installment, I sat down with Tina to discuss affirmative action. You can see that by clicking the video here. And in this episode, we continue in that vein with 3 more conversations, including one with a UT and Princeton professor of hip-hop. Remember to let me know what you think about affirmative action in the comments below. And more importantly, what are your thoughts on these conversations that transpired here? All right, enough talk. Let's get to our first conversation. Meet Ben.
Ben, is it?
Yes.
Steven, nice to meet you, Ben.
Nice
Do you mind scooching in a little bit so I can, that way I don't have to separate my shoulder reach now. So I don't know how familiar you are, if at all, with what we do here with this program. It's basically providing an opportunity to rationalize our positions on seemingly controversial topics. Today is affirmative action. This was by request here at UT. I believe that affirmative action is by definition racist. Not a fan. If you disagree with me, you're more than welcome to change my mind.
Well, I think in a perfect world, I don't think it should exist, but we don't live in a perfect world. You know, we have marginalized these communities. We need help to bring them up, bring them up to the middle class so that they can help, the other members of their community, bring them up, and so that we can eliminate this kind of poverty inequality that usually ties with race. So I think affirmative action is a great way of helping get rid of that.
Okay, so you said it's a great way. So it sounds to me like you've said you believe that it's the right thing to do, and you believe it's an effective way.
Yes.
Why do you believe that it's been effective?
Well, I think those communities, those marginalized communities, are moving up through the classes, and because they're getting these college educations that they can get because of affirmative action.
Okay, so you believe that when you say marginalized communities, I want to be clear. Do you mean Asian Americans? Do you mean simply Black Americans? Because there are obviously marginalized communities who are very anti-affirmative action.
Yes, I mean like all minority groups.
Okay, so how do you believe that affirmative action, for example, is effective in helping Asian American students? Because many of them would disagree with you. There's a lawsuit against Harvard because of the unfair standards applied to them that are not applied equally to Black applicants.
Well, I think, not all of them feel that way. I mean, there are some...
Let me ask you this. Do you think that it's fair, for example, when the documents were revealed from Harvard, that on average an Asian American student was required to get a 1350 in the SATs versus a Black student who was only required to get an 1100?
No, I don't think it's fair, but again, I think it's not about being fair, it's about bringing these communities up, because the African American community has been marginalized more than the Asian American community, I would say.
Okay, so it should be based on how much marginalization?
Yeah.
How do we, first off, before we get to how effective affirmative action is, I guess how do we rate that? Because Asian Americans were more recently put in internment camps, and we had anti-Asian immigration
internment
policies.
Camps are nothing like slavery, okay?
But it's far more recent.
Recent, but slavery has had a lot more of a lasting effect.
Okay.
Internment camps, they were awful, but the community bounced back from that. More people came out of internment camps than went in. So it's not,
Sure.
But slavery, that is just scarring for an entire race.
Generationally, like even 3, 4, 5,
Oh, yes.
8 generations removed, as opposed to internment camps?
Yes.
So let me ask you, do you think it's right that, for example, an Asian American female student would have to score higher on the SATs to be admitted in comparison to a white male student?
I don't think it's right, but again, I just think that's what's got to happen because we live in an imperfect world.
Okay, so you think it's okay that female Asian American students have to do better than not only Black students, but have to perform better than white Americans? In other words, Asian students actually are unfairly treated in comparison to white Americans. So you would have to argue, I suppose, that Asian Americans have been less marginalized than white males.
I haven't seen any numbers that prove that.
Yeah, if you just look at the numbers, for example, at Harvard, and I can show them to you afterward, the average scores that were required to be admitted into higher education, Ivy League schools, with Asian Americans it was 1350, with white Americans it was 1310, with Black Americans it was 1100. So an Asian American female student would, on average, be required to have a higher SAT score and higher performative metrics academically than a white male. These are the consequences of affirmative action.
Again, I haven't seen those.
Okay, but let's assume that I'm not lying.
Okay.
Where would you line up on that?
Just kind of how it goes.
Okay, so forget about the Asian Americans, the Asian females, they can fend for themselves. So we'll get to black Americans. So you believe that affirmative action is a good thing, it's morally imperative. I understand
Yes.
that, I disagree. But you believe that it's been effective for black Americans. And you said because now we see them having more or less economic disparity. Am I
Yes.
correct? I'd like to hear you kind of express your position, why you believe affirmative action has worked.
Well, I think it helps them get the education that they need to do well, in this economy. I mean, because you got to have like a master's degree to get like basically a minimum wage job nowadays. So I think it helps having that, especially when a lot of these schools, I mean, UT itself has been targeting against African American students. I mean, we have a monument to Robert E. Lee back over there, not especially something really welcoming.
How have they been targeting African Americans? I'm not familiar with that.
Well, there was a whole article actually published about how they used test scores to target African American students.
How so?
I'm not entirely familiar.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not familiar either, so I'd be interested to hear that, because that sounds like it should be a national scandal if a university is specifically targeting black Americans.
It was in the 60s after they were forced to.
Oh, okay, in the 60s and
Yeah,
whatnot.
not currently.
Oh, okay, good. Well, interesting that you bring that up. There are fewer, because you brought up the idea that more African Americans are seemingly having better economic metrics. I don't know if you have any data to back that up, but there are actually fewer black Americans admitted to universities today than there were 35 years ago.
Is that percentage-wise, or is that just numbers?
As a percentage of the population in total. Yeah, fewer today than 35 years ago. So it seems that maybe affirmative action hasn't encouraged overall enrollment. But what we have seen is worse performative standards for black Americans on campus. And these are these unintended consequences, the soft prejudice of low expectations. For example, black Americans who get admitted into a law program, let's use Harvard Law as an example, they're 4 times as likely to fail the bar exam, even though they've gone to an Ivy League school. And logically, I would argue that black Americans being admitted solely on the basis of race, as you've advocated, with lower academic performance metrics, end up with a bar exam, which is blind, there is no racial bias there, with lower academic performance metric outcomes. And there are more black Americans who drop out. 50% of black Americans on college campus and higher education, they make up the bottom 10% respectively, because they're mismatched against peers who had to be more qualified to get into the university. And that creates actually a real problem and a higher dropout rate and lower performance outcomes for them. Could you see that as maybe an outcome of unintended consequences for affirmative action that might mean it's not so effective?
I guess.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you being honest about it. And you know what? I would like to see, here's one thing I want you to understand. I would like to see all Americans do better. And I certainly would like to see the outlook, economic outlook for African Americans improve just as much as I want to see it improve for you or white Americans. But I don't believe that's necessarily predicated on racially accepting people to college on the basis of race. A, because I think it's immoral to racistly implement college application or acceptance policies. B, the best indicator that we have, or certainly the most determinative factor as far as one's economic success, academic success, whether they end up in prison, has nothing to do with a college degree. Do you know what it is? Do you know what the single greatest socioeconomic indicator of future wealth, employment, graduating college is?
I would assume it's experience.
No.
And I don't know.
Having a dual parent household. Having a mother and a father who are still together. Do you know that if you graduate high school and you wait until you're married to have kids, there's a 98% chance that you don't end up in poverty? Over 70% make at least middle class or higher. The social mobility in this country is unheard of for both black Americans and white Americans. Now the problem, and we see this across all races, anytime you deal with a single parent household, and Barack Obama expressed this as well, beyond just research papers, the likelihood of ending up in prison is exponentially higher. The likelihood of behavioral disorders, the likelihood of not making it through high school is exponentially higher. Interestingly, from the 1960s, where single parent households made up less than 25% of all black households, in 2019 they make up almost 80%. whereas with the white household, it's below 30%. That actually would explain the economic disparity far more than the idea of affirmative action or its implementation therein.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if that's the only factor, because I feel like there are other factors that cause, people to separate, to have single households.
I agree. Can I present to you my case as to why that is? It would be actually policies very similar to affirmative action. It would be policies like the Model Cities program under Lyndon Johnson, the Modern Welfare Program, as we know it, these were implemented in the 1960s, that encouraged and financially incentivized people to be single-parent households. That's why you see such a strong family household demographic for Black Americans in the 1960s degrade to 80% are fatherless households or single-parent households. There's an economic incentive with the current welfare system to not be married.
How so? I mean, because if you're
How many
married,
checks you can collect?
If you're married, though, you get tax breaks that you don't get.
It doesn't counterbalance the single household benefits that you would get from a welfare program, the current welfare program. And that's what's so alarming to me about affirmative action, right? Because I understand in principle the idea of model cities, the idea of the welfare implementation, right? I understand this is right after 65, the Voting Rights Act. And of course you had the Civil Rights Act in the 60s as well. I understand that they were trying to right the wrongs of previous generations. But the way to right the wrong of previous generations, which involved systemic discrimination against blacks, I think we agree, now involves systemic discrimination against other people, or certainly systemic targeting of blacks for specific programs, right? Mm-hmm. And so they created the Model Cities program, they created the Modern Welfare Program, which incentivized single-parent households, which created more economic disparity than we could have imagined. And that is very closely mirrored by affirmative action. It's trying to right the historical wrongs of blacks not making up enough of the campus fabric in the past by implementing racist policies now. And it's having very much the same effects of black students falling behind, of creating racial tension and unrest, and actually lowering overall performance metrics. So I would argue that it's not only immoral because it's racist, but results-wise, just as welfare and the Model Cities program have had detrimental effects in trying to right the wrongs of the past, affirmative action has harmed Black Americans, let alone Asian Americans, in trying to right the racial discriminations of the past. And that's why I think we need to do away with it.
So, just if I may ask,
Sure.
What do you think we should do to right the wrongs of the past against these?
I don't think you can right the wrongs of the past. I think what you can do is set the best path moving forward toward the future. And we have seen states that have basically done away with affirmative action. You know what's interesting? Some minority enrollment has gone up, some minority enrollment has gone down. There's really no correlation. It's actually been relatively evens out. So affirmative action hasn't had that much of an overall effect. It does seem as though it's had an overall effect on there being fewer Black Americans on campus over the last 35 years. I think we need to do away with it and stop focusing on viewing everyone through the prism of lens and view them through the prism of intellectual diversity and performative contributions. I think that would be fair to Asian Americans, I think it would be fair to Black Americans, and I think it's the right thing to do.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ben.
No problem.
I appreciate it. Ben, thank you for sitting down, brother.
No problem.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Ben, everybody.
And as always, if you want these videos to continue, please do consider joining Mug Club at louderwithcrowder.com/mugclub. It's $69 annually for students, veterans, active military. You get this wonderful hand-etched mug and the full daily show that is not available on YouTube. Of course, we are not currently monetized, so it's the only way to ensure that this content continues. And of course, bookmark this channel. Check back for new videos every single weekday, 9 p.m. Eastern. Okay, next conversation is with UT and Princeton professor of hip-hop, Raphael.
How are you, man?
Hello, sir. How are you?
Good, Raphael.
Steven, what's your name? Raphael?
Yeah.
Raphael or Raphael?
Raphael.
Raphael, okay.
Like, Ninja Turtles, as most kids want to compare me to.
I liked Raphael as a kid because he had a little bit of spunk, a little bit of attitude.
He was a wild man.
He was a wild man. I appreciate it.
My favorite color is red, as you can see, as was his.
Well, I don't know if it was red, if it was blue. Those look brand new.
Red. No, they're not. They're scuffed up.
You just keep them looking good?
No, wear them too often. They're dancing shoes.
Okay. Well, they certainly look better than my shoes. So, dancing shoes. So, you are a professor?
Yeah, I teach dance, hip hop improvisational approach to hip hop forms and introduction to hip hop.
Oh, wow. And do you teach that here at UT?
Yes, I do.
Okay, here at UT.
Semester, yeah.
Okay, wow. So you teach hip hop or improvisational approach to hip hop at UT?
Yes, I do.
After this, do you think you could maybe show me something?
I could, man.
Would you? I don't. I'm very white. I'm unathletic, but I'm good at some things.
Right.
But my mom says I'm a good dancer, so we'll give it a whirl.
Yeah, your moms tell the truth when they're lying.
Yeah, exactly. They're always telling you the truth when they compliment you. All right, so Professor Raphael, I don't know how familiar you are at all with what we do with this segment.
Not at all.
So it's basically an opportunity to sit down and hopefully have productive civil dialogues where we rationalize our position on perceived confrontational issues. The idea is to kind of disarm some hot button issues that people often yell about rather than talk about.
Yeah.
And so today, this was by request actually from students at UT, as a topic of affirmative action, specifically as it relates to applications and acceptance on college campus. I believe that affirmative action as a policy is by definition racist. I think it's wrong, and I don't think that it's worked. But if you disagree with me, you're more than welcome to change my mind, Professor.
Well, initially I was curious about what this whole thing was. I don't feel it's racist, and not having as much information, I'm sure, as you do about it to be able to, I don't know, let's just say debate that.
You might have more being a black professor, more experience.
Yeah, my first thing is, by definition of affirmative action is to allocate resources to those who are underprivileged or have been discriminated against from the beginning.
Okay.
That's already a hint of racism, right?
Discrimination against people of anyone based on race is racism, yes.
So it starts with that.
Yes.
So to even the playing field, you allow those certain resources, so to speak, to be distributed to people who don't get them, and I think everybody across the board now gets a fair chance at something they're interested in.
Yeah, so I don't know that I agree with you in a sense that when I say racist, I mean it by definition. I showed this to someone else. I just want to make sure so that you don't think I'm being cute. I don't necessarily mean racially negative, but racial prejudice or discrimination, right? And so affirmative action, in responding, I agree with you, everything you just said, in responding to systemic racism, has now created a policy that is systemically racist, and that it specifically either includes people based on race or excludes people based on race. Notably, Asian Americans have been disproportionately affected by affirmative action negatively. I'm sure you're aware of the lawsuits that are happening at Harvard. So I understand where you're coming from, and I think that it's a virtuous goal to want to correct the wrongs of the past. I don't believe that the right way to do that is to then implement more systemic discrimination, whether it's against Asians, white Americans, Mexican, black Americans, whatever it is. And I also would argue that it has not been effective in achieving the results that it wants. So even if it's a virtuous goal, if we agreed that this idea of sort of, to use the term as someone used earlier, reverse discrimination now against other people with preferential treatment for black Americans, if we agree that that is morally correct, it still hasn't had net positive results. And in many ways, it's had net negative results for black Americans.
Right. I can't agree with that. And
you can or can't?
I can.
Oh, okay, very nice.
Look, I agree with
good.
that a little bit. And I have to go back to some basic, run-of-the-mill statements. Two wrongs don't make a right. Right? But at the same time, man, there are, because I agree with what you said, it has not made a major difference.
Right.
It only benefit people, a certain percentage of people, which then still leaves a chunk of those people out. So it doesn't allow everybody that same kind of privilege, so to speak, right? What I wanted to say is, say you have someone someone brought this up, they have some kind of disability. Right.
Like a physical disability or mental disability?
Yeah. And again, let's go back some. When I grew up, there was black and white. That was it. Right. People called you something out of your name. White people called black people something out of their name. It was racist. Now, I don't think with all of the things that are across the board at this point, all the different groups, it's no longer racist. it's now what I would call xenophobia. People are afraid of something different. You understand? There's more than just everybody has a preference, something that they do not like. It just so happens to be that the human being comes in different colors, shapes, and sizes. And so I
think that's true of some people, not all people. For example, I don't think you're afraid of me being white, and I'm not afraid of you being black. I should hope not.
That's because my character says I'm not afraid of you.
Right.
But I've gone in places that create a tension where I am afraid to be in a certain place, right? And not only because of what I look like, but because I might present an intimidating view. Right. And anyway,
what's interesting is what you just brought up is actually an argument that people often make for racially segregated schools. Because, for example, we see that sex-limited schools, like all-boys schools or all-girls schools, they perform much better. And the reason for that is because they don't feel uncomfortable either, not even necessarily being a minority. For a long time we assumed it was because black people are a minority and they felt uncomfortable around a lot of white people. But then we found out the same thing was true even if you had a pretty mixed student population. And people sort of being in an environment where they feel as though they don't have to worry about insensitivities, offending people, or this sort of xenophobic mindset, as you've addressed, generate more positive outcomes in all boys or all girls schools. And so you have some racists who say, well, then we should just have segregated schools completely. And I know that is not at all what you're advocating. It's not at all what I'm advocating. It's just interesting that we take something, and I think we both agree and say, fear of anyone based on race is bad. Racists say, because it's natural, we need to implement segregation. And that's what we've seen historically. And I think, this is in my opinion, a soft version of that is what we now know as affirmative action, because it is excluding people based on race. And I think that's wrong.
But you don't, for me, man, it's hard to get the whole idea about your definition of race out of my head because I came up in the 70s, I only know one way. You understand?
Sure.
So we're talking someone who's, let's just say, socio-political background, or their poverty level is different, their educational level is different.
Right.
So for school, no, I'm sorry. There's a lot of things I want to say, I can't get them all out, but
that's okay, you have time.
To get into a university, a prestigious university, let's just say here, Princeton.
Sure.
They expect a certain kind of student in place. If you can't deliver what the expectations of that university is, it doesn't work then. Right? Then I'm not going to allow you into my school because you don't have what it takes to be here.
Right.
Regardless.
And my issue with affirmative action is it's the opposite that's occurring now. They're saying you don't have what it takes to get here, but because you're black, we're going to admit you, even though an Asian kid worked harder and got better scores.
Somewhere along the line, someone said there's not enough of a particular race people here.
Yeah.
Now, I again go back to this thing. I don't think it's racist, but I do agree with you in what you said earlier.
Okay.
And you're not talking about black and white. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. So if you're not smart enough to get into a certain place, then nothing is the affirmative action in that way is only going to cause more problems.
Right.
For on a larger scale, not only the people who want to get into schools, not the parents of those people who want to get into schools, but when that gets out, you got a whole race of people or a whole group of people who now have a problem with that, and they create this fuss about it's not fair, right?
But it isn't.
And so, no, I'm not talking about the.
Oh, sorry, maybe I missed it. I thought you were saying, like, for example, white students or Asian students are saying, well, hey, hold on a second, I got higher on the SATs and did more extracurriculars. It's not fair that it went to a black guy, and they make a big fuss, but I think the Asian kid makes a fuss rightfully because it's tough right now. It's tough to get into a college as an Asian American right now.
But I'm saying if this school says you have to have a certain criteria to get in, what's the problem with that? That's okay, right? That's what's supposed to be.
Well,
when you start saying that we now have somebody got pissed off because they assume that you're that you had what it takes to get into school.
Right.
Right? Some parents are mad now because they believe that you belong in there, and you just may not. So now this affirmative action thing kicks in and...
Well, no, I believe the problem is before that. So I would like to go back to what you said before, and I agree with you. I have no problem with a school saying, this is the set criteria for you to meet to be eligible for the school, right? I think we both agree.
Right.
My problem is, whether it's white, Asian, or black, when that criteria includes, and this race. And that's what affirmative action is. Affirmative action isn't, you need these test scores, you need these extracurriculars, you need this essay. It's, you need all of these things, and you also need to be black. And let's add on top of it, you also can have lower scores if you're black because we expect less of you.
Right.
And I just had a girl who sat down with me, a girl named Tina, and this is just, again, privileged white guy, but very sad where she was saying, well, I think I benefited from affirmative action. And she listed everything that she did. She came from Longview, went to a small school that didn't have a lot of AP programs. She did a lot of extracurriculars and wrote an essay. I said, well, that sounds to me like you earned your spot here at UT. You worked really hard. And she said, yeah, I'd like to think so. I said, do you not think that you deserve to be here? She said, well, I think so, but I also think it could be because of affirmative action. And I said, that's so sad. It's so sad that you can work so hard, and because other people maybe didn't work so hard but got in really based on tokenism, you rob that girl Tina of her self-confidence in earning her accomplishments. So I agree with you that universities should set out criteria. I just have a problem with that criteria specifically involving race, and I think it's had negative results.
Right. So what about the idea of just having more diversity into the school or into the system? Right? That's another way to look at it.
Is diversity...
We want to make a diverse program. We want to make a diverse university where it now doesn't look like just white, Asian, Latino. Everybody now has access to get into this place, whether it's school, job, or what. Equal opportunity was the same thing in a sense.
Well, no, because I don't have a problem with diversity occurring naturally based on the premise of equal opportunity. It sounds to me like what you're talking about is equal outcome. Let me ask you so I clarify, so I'm not misunderstanding. When you say diversity, what do you mean specifically?
Okay, if you have your school's 90% white, and the only people that can qualify to get into schools are people of that background. We need to do something.
But that's not. I want to be clear. That's not what happened. What's happening? Affirmative action is the opposite.
No. I'm trying to explain something.
Okay.
To
Now.
the
Okay.
point, right. So
apologies.
The university is all white. Let's just leave it at that. Make it simple. University is all white.
Okay.
Someone says something in the system. Some group says the school is all white and they need to have more color in there. So the school implements some kind of system that says, let's reach out to the Spanish community, Black community, Asian community, right? And they do that. And then the most Asians are scoring, or they are qualifying to be in that place. Now the school is white, Asian. So how do we get more Latinos and how do we add more diversity to the program? So if
you're talking
those people
racial
are not
diversity.
if those people are not getting the qualifications or the scores that it takes to get into school, then something needs to be applied for that to happen. So the school meets the quota. Affirmative action sets that up.
Okay, so you support the idea of racial quotas to promote racial diversity.
Yeah, but I wouldn't call it.
I mean, I just want to make sure because you just said quotas.
Yeah, but I wouldn't call it racial.
Okay.
Because.
So what would you call specifically allowing a black person in with lower credentials because they're black, if not racial? What would you call that?
Offhand, man, I would just say it's offering an opportunity to someone who would never have the chance to do that kind of.
But they do have the chance by meeting the same criteria. So let me kind of present to you.
They don't come from a place where if they grow up in an environment that doesn't allow them, first of all, to grow with their environment, to move to be surrounded by the thing that gives them a certain kind of knowledge where they can learn these things to get into the schools. Right? We take tests sometimes. Coming as a black person in certain schools.
Well, you're still a black person, from what I understand.
We take tests to get in.
You didn't do a Rachel Dolezal, did you? You've always been black.
Right. So we take these tests to get into a certain place. If I fail the test, man, I got to go back.
Yeah.
But how do I learn how
But
to
that's the
take
same thing
these
happens with
tests?
white people.
But how do them too? How do people learn to take tests to qualify them to get into the place? If it's never going to happen, then we need to.
Well, it's already happening. So let me address kind of your point. So you were saying a school is entirely white. Okay. First off, I disagree with your premise of diversity for diversity's sake is a virtue. I don't think so. I think that intellectual diversity is more important. And by the way, that's much more lacking on campus than racial diversity, intellectual diversity. As a matter of fact, you have 40% of all university campuses with not a single Republican or conservative professor at all. 40%. You can't find 40% of any schools that don't have a single black professor. You can't find probably 5% that don't have a single black professor or a single lesbian professor. So intellectual diversity is more important to me. But to go to that point, you're presupposing that if a school is entirely white, which has never really been the case, by the way. As a matter of fact, black enrollment in higher tier universities like Ivy League is lower now than 35 years ago pre-affirmative action.
Agreed.
So affirmative action has had a net negative effect on black enrollment at higher education. So I don't agree with the premise that it's all white by design. So I can't possibly agree with the next premise, which is we need to create X% a quota of black people by design. I can't, because it wasn't by design that there were majority white people, just like it's not by design that Asian Americans who have disproportionately faced discrimination. And I don't want to compare discrimination of black Americans to Asian Americans, but certainly internment camps and the immigration policies against people from China were very, very severe. I don't believe that they should now be forced to meet higher standards, even though they faced the same kind of systemic discrimination, solely because without any quotas, they were outperforming white people. So an example right now, when we talk about racial diversity, a white male can score lower. So we all go, okay, it should be okay for a black person to score lower than an Asian and get into the same university. That's what people, I don't agree with it. But the unintended consequences are an Asian female right now has to score higher than a white male, solely because Asian Americans have typically performed well in standardized testing. They have done very well with extracurriculars. And you know the reason for that? They've faced discrimination, they've faced extreme poverty, and first-generation immigrants. They have very strong nuclear family households and a strong emphasis on that. And this is something that we talked about before with black Americans. When you look at this and you go, okay, why are there fewer black enrollees right now in university, top-tier universities than before? Especially when you look at the fact that a black female with a higher education degree will actually make more than a white female. So the gap is closed in certain ways, but the disparity comes from, let me ask you this, do you know what the single biggest socioeconomic indicator is of, it's not even close, Barack Obama said this, every stat that we have reflects that the biggest indicator we have of whether you graduate high school, whether you end up in prison, whether you go to a good college, whether you make a good living, whether you have healthy relationships, dual parent households, a mom and a dad still actively engaged in the household. Black Americans in the 1960s had a 25% single parent household rate or fatherless household rate. Today that's nearly 80. Compared to 25% with white Americans, or 30% with white Americans, and much lower with Asian Americans and Latin Americans. That is a startling trend. And that will put black young men at an extreme disadvantage. And a lot of it, so you have to ask why. And the reason why was because of Lyndon Johnson. I'm sure you remember this. My dad's from Detroit as well. The Model Cities program started in Detroit. And the welfare program, which incentivized single-parent households and was marketed toward black people. And so you go from really strong family structures in the black community, much more so than the white community for a long time, that slowly degraded until today. And that's a more important economic and social factor than even a higher education degree. And we're trying to correct it with affirmative action at university by the time the problem's already begun. And we're trying to correct it with affirmative action, which very much parallels the model cities and the welfare program, and that it's trying to right the wrongs of the past with systemic discrimination toward the future, people of other races. And that's why I don't think that it's morally correct, and I would presuppose that's why the results haven't yielded what we thought affirmative action would.
I can agree with that. I don't think it did any justice. But now I'm starting to think more about. I mean, it could be racist.
What could be racist?
Affirmative action.
Yes.
But
I thought you were saying it could be racism pointing at someone. I was like,
Oh, no,
I was
no,
like,
no,
what?
no. No, but when I
Yeah.
questioned that's what I was curious about. It made me come up here in the first place. I didn't think it was, but putting these things in place the way you're saying it, both of them could stand net side by side. It is and it isn't, depending on how you look at it. Who are you? What kind of information do you have that these things, that you can say that both these things can stand side by side, and in comparison, yes or no, yeah or nay, good or bad, right? Real quick, man, do you remember the study? There was a study in New York where the black, white, Asian kids went to the same school. Whites scored higher than the Asians. I want to say blacks were second. So it went whites, blacks, Asians. Yeah. During the summers over a 4-year period, the Asians went to school and studied and read more during the summers. They were first. 2 years in, it was Asians, blacks, and whites. By the end of the 4-year period, it was Asians, whites, and blacks. Somewhere along the line, something changes. And it could be the fact that no one's pushing, or not enough people are pushing for the black kids to continue outside of the institution.
Fathers.
Right? It could be.
It's definitely,
But I don't come from that. I come from a one-parent household.
And just a mom?
Yeah, and I grew up quick. I had my mom was working 11 to 7, 3 to 11, all these crazy
That's
hours.
very impressive. And I'm sure you understand you're a statistical anomaly, because a lot of black men who didn't have fathers, they ended up in the system, so to speak.
Exactly. Dead, locked up, kids, real bad off. All my friends were that way. To this day, I could probably name about 5, not even, man, three cats I know who didn't go to jail.
Right. Let me ask you this. This is a personal question. How much compared to, because you're a professor, you're successful, you teach. Did you say you teach at Princeton as well, or here?
I'm at Princeton.
Oh, Princeton, and then you teach here at UT. Okay, so hip hop.
Here in the fall, and there.
Wow. Okay, so very accomplished. That's not statistically very typical of. By the way, not only black people, but white people without dads. White people, Asian people without dads, across the board. But let me ask you this: with how successful you are and what you've seen, mentioning your friends who've ended up in prison, which is tragic. It really is tragic. And I think there's a whole argument for prison reform. And I'm actually very happy what Donald Trump has done with nonviolent drug offenders, letting some black people free, which was a big deal. Anyway, sorry, we'll get back to that. I'm getting sidetracked now. How much of an advantage do you think it would be compared to everything else, affirmative action, welfare programs, any other government program that they've created to try and help black Americans? Would you agree that having a dad in your household who supported you would be a much greater factor in your ability to thrive as a child than a government program? Having a dad there who was there for you and supported you, how big of an impact do you think that would have made?
I'm not sure, man, because the variables are very different. Let's just say this: my father's no longer here, but he also wasn't in my life.
Right.
If my father was in my life, I may not be sitting here talking to you. I could have taken the route that he took, whether he was in the house or not. There's also a job you need to do.
Well, okay, I'm assuming a good supportive father is what I'm saying. If you had a good supportive father who took care of your mother and took care of you in the house, how much of an advantage do you think that would have been compared to your friends?
It would be an incredible advantage, man.
And I will tell you, statistically, that's an advantage. And I recognize this when we talk about privilege as someone who is, whether I'm Canadian, French-Canadian immigrant, was born in Detroit anyway. To me, when I look back, I go, for me, having a mother and a father made such a big impact. And when you look at the statistic across all races, it's consistent. White kids don't do well without a dad, black kids don't do well. It's just that 77% of black households don't have a dad right now. And the problem begins long before they get to university. And so then we implement these effectively racist measures in university and quotas to try and fix a problem that was created by government programs in the first place, is my point. It's the unintended consequences, the ripple effect of creating a real problem with economic disparity.
Yeah, now, real quick, what comes to mind when you say that is, earlier you said that something was not by design. right?
If a university, because if it was all white,
Yeah.
the only way I could agree with your argument is if it was all white only by design, where they had a policy that said only white students.
Okay, now,
Yeah.
what you're describing right now, if we go back, and this is this, I can't even get into I can't pull from the stuff right now because my head is all over the place with this. I didn't expect any of this. But when you look at what was set up in the African American communities at a certain time, this is the 60s, late 50s, 60s, 70s, it was to disrupt the homes of
the welfare programs, the model cities programs. Yeah. You know what? I don't know that it was
strategic. I'm sorry. I think some of that was strategic.
Many people make the argument that Lyndon Johnson did it deliberately.
Yeah.
Do you believe that?
I do. And
okay.
it was a design.
Yeah.
It was designed to set up things for what's happening today.
Right.
And there might have been some programs that were put in place or implemented to disrupt that.
But here's the thing, right? It was presented by Lyndon Johnson as a gift, right? It was presented as though, hey, we're going to fix the problems of the past. We're going to implement welfare. We're going to do central urbanized planning.
Right.
Very similar to the way affirmative action by design is presented as a gift.
If something was not looked at critically, it becomes enabling, and that's what that was. And so some things that are implemented into systems are enabling, and affirmative action may just be that thing. May have some kind of, it lingers, man.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I want people to, especially, I mean, what was your path like becoming a professor of hip hop? Because that's not a topic I'm super familiar with, by the way.
Well, okay. Grew up in a one-parent household.
Yeah.
My friends, I sold drugs. They've been out of jail. Not me. My mother was very strong, and so I think she had high expectations of me as a child. I was told to do things and expected them to be done when she came home.
Right.
That carried with me all my life, and I watched my friends grow up in the same one-parent household with their mother. When we got into the street, we did whatever we wanted to do, and they went home and they took whatever they had in the street into the home. I left that shit outside because my mom was going to do what my dad would do: kick your ass.
Yeah. So
I had a standard to live up to, right?
French Canadian moms very similar in that way. My mom slapped me around. I don't have much in common with a lot of these white Americans who get a timeout. I was like, that's what you got?
Well, Canadians breed some tough cats.
French Canadians, yeah. Okay.
So, I didn't go to university. I'm cutting some stuff out, but I didn't go to a university. I had my hands in the street and many different things that created character for me. I learned what was right and wrong, and I learned how to decipher between the two to get where I needed to get to, because people were watching me. Also, I kind of stayed away from certain things that I knew would get me in trouble.
Yeah.
And if I did get in trouble, nobody knew I was getting in trouble, because it's just a street thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Don't have a college degree. Didn't go to college.
So how do you become a professor?
Studied what I thought I was supposed to study on my own. I read a lot after I got out of school. I read a lot. I was hungry for information that I wasn't learning in school. This stuff wasn't set up for me in school. It was a place for me to go to work by standard and get out.
Right.
What am I supposed to do? Live by what everybody else says? Go to college, get an education, wife, kid, job, the whole nine. That didn't interest me. I wanted to make things. I was very creative. And so
I was the same way. They thought I was learning disabled because I was bored.
Oh man, same thing. I was bored, talked all the damn time, and wondered why people weren't doing. I was in the second grade, reading on the 6th grade level.
Right.
When I went to the 2nd grade, we were bused out of the hood into the white schools.
My dad was in Detroit after the riots with that worked like a charm, didn't it? The integration busing system. Another example of unintended consequences.
Yeah. But now with me as a child not knowing what I was doing, where I was going, I took to that. As punishment for talking too much, I was put in the corner to read. As punishment for talking too much, after I read the books, I was put in the corner to write Chinese.
It's a hard language to start. Mandarin or
I don't remember.
Just any Chinese
characters. We were doing characters.
So you didn't know what you were writing?
No, it was just these copied characters.
What if you just had a really racist professor as you're writing racist in Chinese just to screw with you?
I thought the teacher was racist. I did, because I was the only. There was 3 black kids.
Right.
I was the one that was getting in trouble all the time, and I'm like, you're picking on me.
Right.
So I was telling my mom, this woman doesn't like me. In the long run, completely opposite.
Looking back, it was you.
This woman was creating tools for punishment that was encouraging creativity and learning ability.
Turning destructive behavior into productive
ability. Yes. I went to 3rd grade, back to the hood schools. Dude, cutting class, hanging out with the wrong crowds, the whole 9.
Right.
And I remember that to this day. That's where I should have been, because the kind of person I was. So anyway, long story short, somewhere in my head, that stuff stuck with me, man. And I lived by that. I read things that I was interested in all the time. I continued to practice.
Can I ask you a quick question? Because I'm interested. You said, so that happened, that teacher, that was when you were going across district in the new...
Yes.
So was that teacher, was she white or was she black?
She was a old white woman named Miss Funk.
So she was an old white woman, though, who you thought was racist,
I thought she was racist,
but you realized she was...
Later on, she was actually doing things to encourage me to be better.
And then when you went back to the schools where the teachers were primarily black...
No, they were white, too.
They didn't take care of you?
No.
Okay.
It was just shuffling these kids through the school to get out.
Right.
That's it. The punishment was
despite the fact that there's more spending in those schools. A lot of people don't know there's more spending in the inner city schools.
Like prison, man. In prisons, it's the same thing in prison.
Yeah.
So what did they do when we got in trouble in the hood schools? Put you in a room, no book, no nothing. You can't read. You just have to sit there with your head down. Don't talk, no nothing. That's destructive.
My teacher, you know what? I have a similar story. It was in the 4th grade, and I was. Do you care about my story? It's kind of Mary's. Sorry, we've got enough, and then we'll get back to it. But what happened was, I was forced, because in French Canada, you want to talk about discrimination, they actually have something called the language police, where if I open, my name is Steven, if I open Steven's Diner, *S, I could be fined and put in jail, because the French writing has to be 2.5 times bigger than the English writing. Even though Canada is an English country, but French Quebec is a French province. It would be like Texas saying, there's a language police, you have to speak Spanish, and you have to write all your signs in Spanish. So not only that, but if you have a single parent born in Quebec, you have to go to French schooling. So I do speak French and English. French is technically my first language because I learned to read and write it first, but I think in English, and I've lost a lot of my French. So what happened was in the 3rd grade, I fell so far behind because I was doing math and geography and history in French, right? And in foreign language, just because my mom was French, even though my dad was born in Detroit. Right. So because of some kind of a loophole, they finally got me to, in the middle of 3rd grade, no, it would have been middle of 4th grade, they got me switched over. I don't know, we'll have to bleep the names to this, from Monsieur, I think, to Miss. So she was an English teacher.
Okay.
French teacher was very nice, but they thought I was learning disabled, like borderline retarded.
Gotcha.
Moved to an English class where now I'm doing math in English, and this lady, Miss, she was, I want to say South Indian, really harsh, really strict. I did not like her. So I came from a nice teacher who said he's learning disabled. They sent me to a teacher, Miss, who a lot of kids hated, thought was mean, but she stayed after class and taught me long division as long as it took. She didn't do it with a smile on her face, but she cared, and she basically said, your child is not learning disabled. Your child, actually she said your child may have ADHD, but she said this is a language thing that had happened. And so it's just interesting to me that, you know, it really does bridge that racial divide. It is about actually helping people and wanting to better people regardless of where they are, or regardless of their race. And that's my problem with affirmative action on campus, is it's not blind, like your white professor was racially blind and she was just helping a kid. Ms. was just helping a kid. Affirmative action says, don't help the white kid, don't help the Asian kid, you have to help the black kid. And that creates another system.
It also perpetuates the idea that you have to just do what you need to do
Right.
to play the game.
Right.
Just as good as everyone else.
So, okay, sorry, I interrupted, but how did you become a professor of hip hop?
So
Were you a
I
hip hop
studied-
dancer?
Yeah. I started breaking in 1983 with Breaker, and I started breaking in 1983.
Okay.
And it was very new at the time. So super long story short, man, I just studied it and I performed in theater with the first hip hop dance company to put hip hop dance on concert stage, Rennie Harris, in Philadelphia. And from that point on, I found something that kept me engaged all the time. I could make music and dance. I could just set design. I could do all these things. And the stage was an empty canvas for me to do what I had been learning in Miss Funk's class.
Right.
And so, understanding that from 1983 and studying it all the way up to when I started Princeton 2014, I just found myself in different places that gave me an advantage.
That's got to be. I gotta say, that's got to be a weird start at Princeton. Like, you know what we need here at Princeton? Hip hop.
Mind blowing, man.
Yeah.
So they called me and I said no a couple of times, and then something was like, dude.
You turned them down.
I did, because I didn't know. I don't have a degree.
Can you imagine the look on those white people's faces? The deans like, what the
Yo, but I didn't feel I had what it took to be in Princeton. Growing up, I heard Princeton, Harvard, Yale.
Right.
And now I'm here.
And even though you don't have a college degree, it was merit-based because of what you'd accomplished professionally.
Yeah.
So again, that's still merit-based. How upsetting would it be to you? For example, I would imagine that in hip-hop, right, specifically in the 80s, probably largely black, correct?
Black and Latino.
Black and Latino. You know, what if they came in and said, there are too many black hip-hop professors. We need to have more white hip-hop professors.
Okay.
And then you said, but that guy sucks.
Well,
and they're like, yeah, but you know what? There aren't enough of them, so we have lower expectations because we know white people can't dance.
But that doesn't even have anything to do with it, man. What had happened was, because the schools have a certain standard, you can't go in without a degree. You can't teach that level without a degree. So there were a lot of people who had degrees that could study or know someone that they could bring in to teach what they needed to teach.
Right.
So there were white people or people that didn't come from the background who were teaching those classes. And then eventually, I guess the schools just felt like we need to get some qualified people in here to do what they need to do. And a couple of them, Rennie Harris has a couple honorary degrees now from the university, so he doesn't have a degree either. But he's managed to do what needed to be done.
Well, maybe it's different because of the history of hip hop at Princeton. But let's say when you were touring, you said it was mostly black and Latino. Yeah. It would probably piss you off, I would imagine, if they just started hiring white guys to diversify who weren't good dancers. You probably would have said, man, that's not right.
Yeah.
Because someone else who's a better dancer is losing that spot.
True. But if you didn't do the work to get to that point, that's on you. You understand?
But I'm saying, if let's say there were an audition, okay, let's say you were there, and it seems like you're high level, so you probably were in on a lot of auditions.
I didn't play that game much. But
let's say,
your question, you're right.
Yeah.
White people got more of the gigs than the blacks did. Example.
Because there weren't enough of them.
No, not even. They just fit the bill. Now I would go into a place that said the casting call would be the guy with a white beard, blue t-shirt, red sneakers, glasses, and a piercing. Exactly what I would be wearing, coincidentally.
Yeah.
And the person that got the job was completely opposite. White kid, blue eyes, blonde hair, looks like we can put him anywhere we need to put him. And so that is what becomes the visual, being able to identify hip-hop with that thing.
And then you get that NSYNC
That's what happens.
Yeah.
And it's still continuing to do that. So for me,
but I think we were finding common ground where we both agree. In that instance, the best dancer should be the one who gets the job. And even though it wasn't the case, and I'm saying the best student should be the one who gets into school.
I agree. So again, we go back to the beginning of this thing. I said it's not racist. And now I'm thinking maybe it could be,
a little bit.
But with more information, we put both these things on the table, and we're both. There's no right or wrong. It's just how can you prove which one you agree with.
Okay, well, so we both have something to think about.
Definitely, man. I'm definitely going to think about that even more.
You going to show me a little the hip hop thing?
I'll show you.
All right, thanks, you man. Okay, this is the thing. Hold on. All right, he's a professor of hip hop. What do I got to do? So you go like this.
That's it. That's it. Just go up and down.
Go up and down and up and down.
Everybody grab hands, right? We'll do like this big wave.
Yeah, everyone grab hands. Let's do the wave. Everyone grab hands. Come on now. We're going to do the wave.
Let's do a giant wave.
There you go.
We'll start right here.
Okay. We grab hands? Is that okay?
You got to connect it over there.
Johnny, come here. Man. Or Jeff, I'll get my security guy. Come on. My security guy will do the... All right. He's teaching me... Okay.
All right, look.
All right, look.
This is where it's going. There it is.
What?
There it is.
What?
All the way around.
Look at this.
How about that?
Look at this. All different races, genders, the power of dance.
That's called the affirmative wave right there.
Professor Raphael. Thank you very much.
Man.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
You gave me
God bless
to
you.
think about, man.
Be well. Thank you.
Well, look how surprisingly enjoyable that was. I don't know why it's surprising. Maybe it was to you. Okay, next up, Alejandra.
What's your name?
Ale.
Ali?
Yeah, Ale.
Ale?
Yeah, like Alejandra.
Okay, like Alejandra. Okay,
Yes.
forgive me if I don't... Ale.
Yes.
Okay, Steven, forgive me if I don't pronounce it correctly.
No, no worries.
Should I only grab a sip of water before we start? I'm very thirsty.
Every time I go to Starbucks, I have to name myself Ashley.
That's what they put on the cup?
Yeah.
Yeah, my mom is French-Canadian, and she just doesn't pronounce anything properly, so I have to pronounce it for her. She goes, Francine, and they're like, what? I go, Francine.
Yeah.
Just put that on there, so I understand. So, Ale.
Yes.
Okay, I'm close, all right. I don't know how familiar you are, if at all, with what we do with this program.
Yeah.
Okay, you are. So typically it's... Let me allow this to finish. Okay, that's it. It's a chance to sort of rationalize our positions on controversial topics. Today, by request at UT, is affirmative action. I believe that affirmative action is racist by definition. I think it's morally wrong, and it hasn't worked. If you disagree with me, you're more than welcome to change my mind.
Well, I mean, I think that calling it racist isn't, like, I guess the correct term, because it's like a policy that was instituted in response to, like, social inequalities experienced by different, like, disadvantaged minorities and disadvantaged, like, racial groups.
I agree with what, I just want to make sure, I agree with what you just said, but it's still racist by definition.
You see, I just don't agree with that. But
okay, well, I just want to make sure where you because I understand that what you're saying is racism generally has a negative connotation, and I think that affirmative action has a negative connotation because of its results. But I'm using this definition of racism here: racial prejudice or discrimination. By definition, affirmative action is discriminating against members of specific races based on racial identity. Now, they might be doing it for what they believe to be an altruistic reason, which I understand you agree with, but by its definition, it still is exclusive based on race.
But you see, I don't think that it, like, excludes any, like, race from getting it accepted into, like, a university.
Sure it does.
I mean, it can lower the pool of acceptance, like, space that a university has, because it designates, like, a certain amount for different races, or, you know, but it doesn't, like, exclusively say, or it doesn't, like, kind of, like, if you're applying to UT, you're not just gonna get denied because you're white.
No, but I could because I'm black. So my point is this: when I'm sure you're aware of the Harvard lawsuit, but gosh, we have clocks, we have planes going over. It's a little bit difficult. So sorry if I get this really close to your face. Right now, for example, they look to accept people based on race, specifically Black Americans and Hispanics, at the exclusion of Asian Americans and white Americans, particularly Asian Americans. So with the same performance standards, or even better performance standards, they will exclude Asian Americans based on race.
Yeah, well, I think, because you mentioned earlier how you said that you don't think it's morally right.
I don't.
I think that it's morally right to kind of uplift different communities that are socially disadvantaged throughout the United States, or throughout, you know, like, the world or whatever.
Okay.
And this is kind of a way to do that, because people that benefit from affirmative action tend to graduate from college more than people that don't benefit from it. So it helps, like, those people that are educated and that are more knowledgeable in, like, their area of study than other people from their same race or ethnicity that probably won't do as well because they didn't benefit from it.
Yeah, well, empirically that's not the case. empirically there are fewer, for example, black Americans in university than there were 35 years ago.
Yeah, but I mean the graduation rate has dramatically increased also.
In university?
Yeah.
Well, that's across the board. But there are fewer enrollees in higher education of black Americans than there were 35 years ago. And actually, their graduation rates are lower. And as a matter of fact, their performance standards once they're in college is far lower for black Americans. For example, like a black American in law school right now is 4 times more likely to fail the bar exam than a white person. That didn't used to be the case.
Yeah, but I don't think that's due because of affirmative action. I think that's because of like the different disadvantages that they face when they grow up. Like,
so you believe that a black American in 2019 faces more systemic disadvantages than in 1969?
Maybe
because in
not.
1969, it wasn't. They graduated more. They passed the exam
I don't think
more
that's
often.
Systemic. I just think that like even through history, the way that the laws and the policies in the United States have been structured, it just hasn't been beneficial to African Americans. Like right after they got out of like slavery up until now, like just,
up until now.
Well, not up. I mean, up until like contemporary America, like a few decades ago, the whole civil rights era and like all of that.
Okay.
But I believe that things have improved for African Americans, like systemically, but they still are like lagging in the race. Like in
How so? How do you believe they've improved, and how do you believe they're lagging, I guess?
I mean, because like how we talked about, graduation rates have increased in the past like few decades, but that's like across
They haven't
the
for
board.
black. Well, I'm confused by what you mean for. Do you mean graduation rates in university, or do you mean high school? Because high school graduation rates haven't.
No, in
they've
university.
declined.
Well, that's also because of the economic disadvantages that they face, like in
How so?
public schools, in how like their schools that. Okay, so
Like less funding.
yes, exactly.
But there's actually significantly higher public funding to public schools in urban areas. For example, like Detroit, where I was born, right? Where my dad was raised. And I lived in Michigan for a long time. The average per pupil spending in Detroit schools is, I think, 8th in the country. At one point, it was like top 5. Or you look at Washington, D.C., in areas that are primarily black, they spend significantly more per pupil. In Detroit, it's about 14,000, right? That's a lot more than a national average, certainly more than white people. But the graduation rate is, I think, 20-something% for black Americans. So the spending doesn't work.
But I think it's not necessarily about spending.
Okay, so it's not
money,
economic. Then I want to hear, yeah.
It's an economic problem, but not like that schools don't get enough, I guess, because African Americans and Hispanics tend to have different like problems growing up financially at home, so they won't be as like ready to take on like high school level courses as like someone that's not experienced. Like, they don't have to work when they're like 15, 16.
And why do you believe they face, considering that they're not facing it at school, they're not facing it systemically, but you're saying they're facing economic disadvantages at home? Why do you think that is?
I think it's just because of like how the like structure of like races and ethnicities is in the United States. Like,
well, how? I'm confused, and I'm trying to understand your position, because you kind of said like, well, if you look at the economic situation with schools, we both agree it's not an economic situation with schools or public funding. That's not the case. So you said it's at home. So if it's at home, it's not structural. Why do you believe that there are more economic disadvantages to black Americans, for example, at home?
because when like those parents grew up and like when they got that education, they didn't, I guess, succeed at the same rate as like other ethnicities, like white people, or white people and Asian Americans and all that. So just like in the past few years or in the past few decades, the trend has continued, and it's like it's bettering now. But I don't think that affirmative action is like racist, or if it's, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how
I don't fully understand, but I would disagree with you in that the trend has gotten worse since the 1960s.
I don't think it's gotten worse. I think that
it has. I'm telling you empirically, it has. For black Americans, actually, the economic disadvantages have gotten worse for black American children than black American children in the 60s or 70s. It's worse today. They get more funding publicly. They have affirmative action at school. Yes, all those things. They get more money through public funding. 100% we agree. But at home, personally, they do experience a disproportional amount of economic disadvantages compared to white families or Asian families.
Well, yeah, because of, again, that goes back to like black people and like Hispanics not having the same opportunities that white people do, like when they...
No, that's not it. I'm saying they actually have more opportunities economically. They get more spending on their schools. They have more applications that are accepted based on affirmative action. Do you know why? Do you know what the single biggest socioeconomic determining factor is in the country, bar none, according to Pew Research, according to Heritage, according to Barack Obama, what is, if you could pick one thing that would most significantly determine your economic outlook, your criminal outlook, your personal outlook in relationships, what do you think that would be?
I think you mentioned it earlier. Was it single-parent households?
Yes. It's having two parents in the house.
Well, I mean, yeah, that also goes back to, like, I guess different issues that don't, I mean, single-parent households, like, that's, I guess, individualistic, but
hold on a second, it is individualistic, but why do you think we've gone from the 1960s, which sort of you brought up, right? Pre-discrimination and sort of the Voting Rights Act. Why do you think black Americans went from only a 25% single-parent household to nearly 80% today? And that determines you being more poor, that determines you ending up in prison, that determines you developing depression, that determines you having a successful marriage of your own. Why do you think that, not individually, statistically, overwhelmingly it went from only 25% fatherless or single-parent households to nearly 80, and is not reflected in Asian households or white households?
I mean, I don't know. I'm not, like, I wouldn't.
Isn't that important, though? I mean, if we agree...
Why do you think that happened?
Well, I can answer you why it's happened, but I want to beforehand ask, would you... Let's say you don't have the statistics, okay? But I can offer them to you afterward. Would you agree with the general premise that the idea of having a nuclear family with a mother and a father supporting children is a huge influence in their success in life and a huge advantage? Okay. And let's assume I'm not lying on the statistics that black Americans have gone from very strong nuclear families to single parent or fatherless households, okay? So let's assume we both agree on that. So will we both agree then that it would be important to observe that problem and say, okay, how can we reverse this trend? Because that would do more than affirmative action on campus or more than public school funding. We both agree on that? Okay. So the reason why is because in the 60s, as a way to, you've heard this sort of analogy, the pendulum swings both ways. It was discriminatory, so to try and correct previous discrimination, it started under Lyndon Johnson with the Model Cities program, actually. Detroit was picked first because it was the wealthiest city in the country in the 1950s. So, government programs, centralized urban planning started in the 1960s, and a modern welfare program, which incentivized and encouraged single-parent households. So in trying to correct the systemic oppression of the past, they instated a policy which I believe is racist by definition to fix it moving forward, which led to unbelievably negative economic outcomes and socioeconomic outcomes for black Americans, and that is mirrored very much by affirmative action on campus. To fix what happened before, let's institute a racially exclusive policy going forward. My point is that in the economy at large, when you look at the welfare, modern welfare program, the Model Cities program, it harmed black Americans irreparably for decades, and affirmative action, we're seeing the ripples of it doing that exact same thing.
You see, I don't think that, like, affirmative action caused, like, that, or I don't think that it's...
No, I was saying what caused the single-parent household is the modern welfare system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I know, but I'm saying I don't think that affirmative action has, like, negatively affected, like, black Americans or Hispanic Americans, because it's given them more opportunities to go to get a better education and get a better job. So just within that, like, there are statistics that prove that people, like, again, how I said earlier, that benefit from affirmative action do end up getting higher paid jobs, graduate more, and tend to do better than those that didn't benefit from it.
No, not really, economically. And if it is, I would say that the statistics show it's negligible, and it's much, much, much smaller than had we not implemented big government programs that encourage fatherless and single-parent households. That's my problem. That's my point. Is it mirrors the same big government solutions to prior discrimination on campus, and it's only ever had a net negative outcome. And as far as it having positive outcomes, I was just talking with Tina about this. You'd make more going to a trade school. The idea that a college degree is a determining factor of your economic status, it's just not true today. I
mean, yes and no, because if you want to be like a professional, if you want to be a lawyer or a doctor, you need to go through schooling to be able to be a lawyer or a doctor. But I do agree that sometimes a college degree in, like, specific areas doesn't really like benefit someone.
So I want to understand your premise. Let's use lawyer as an example. do you believe, because that's actually a very specific example I brought up, overall, specifically with black Americans, since we've been talking about that, 50% of black students right now in higher education make up the bottom 20% of the class. In law, 50% make up the bottom 10%. A black student right now in the United States is 4 times as likely to fail the bar exam. Now that happens after university, right? So they've already gotten in. The bar is not racist. The university isn't racist. Why do you think they are failing the bar exam at such an astronomical rate in comparison to Asians and white Americans?
Because again, how they grew up and how like since they were raised, they were at a disadvantage compared to white Americans and Asian Americans, and that doesn't like I don't think that because they were at disadvantage, then they should not be given that like affirmative action, because then affirmative action does help them kind of.
But it doesn't.
Offset.
At the end, it doesn't. They fail the bar at 4 times the rate of white students.
But not. You're talking about like African Americans in general.
On college campus, yeah.
Yes.
They perform very poorly on the objective metrics afterward because they're mismatched with Asian American
that's a
or
general,
white.
like that's a general fact.
Yes.
If you talk about black Americans that benefit from affirmative action.
Yeah, it's negligible. It's negligible, and it is at the expense of other people. So that's where it goes to it being morally correct. Do you believe, for example, sir, can I ask you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you believe that it's morally correct that an Asian American should have to get, like an Asian female right now applying to, let's say, Harvard, has to get a 1350 on her SATs to be accepted when a black student only needs 1100?
Yeah, well, do you think it's morally correct that a black student or a Hispanic student faces like racial bias when taking the SAT through like wordings and through language that is used? I mean, it's like both are rhetorical.
And Asians don't?
I mean,
Let me ask you this. Do you think that it's fair that an Asian American woman has to score higher on the SATs than a white male? Because that's a consequence of affirmative action.
Well, I mean, if you think you can't really like measure fairness, or because obviously like every single side of like a political issue or like just an issue in general is gonna favor one side or the other in some way. So there's gonna be like a pro and a con to like each issue, I guess.
Not always.
So.
No, see, that's interesting. Say favor aside. What does that mean by definition? Favor. Favoritism.
It's not that it's favoritism. I'm just saying that like.
Okay, well then explain for me, because you just said favor, and I wanted to explain why I disagree with you. So let's remove favor. Yeah. You just said any policy will favor a side. So what did you mean to say?
I mean like any. Sorry, it's because my friend is like. I just mean that like any, like for example, it's because okay, I lost my train of thought because of that. So Asian American.
You want me to give you some hot coffee? You can throw in your friend's face.
I know.
Okay.
So Asian Americans and whites, I don't think that they experience the disadvantage that like Hispanics and black people experience like growing up and you know through their childhood and up until like
internment camps, Chinese immigration policy. No.
Okay, but the internment camps isn't like the same thing as like black, like the experience of.
Well, you said Latino Americans. What have Latin American immigrants experienced that would be on par with internment camps or bans on immigration from China, which we experienced for a very long time? What have Latin Americans experienced even comparable to that? I can't think of anything.
I mean, I'm personally from Mexico, and like I had to come to the United States because of like the drug cartel violence in Matamoros. So it's like we haven't necessarily experienced something like I guess here in the U.S. But
no, you haven't.
But I mean like.
So why would it be our job to correct the wrongs of your terrible, corrupt government in Mexico?
Well, it's not to correct their like wrongs. It's to give like I guess a fair chance for these people that grew up disadvantaged, because you talk about fairness is also like trying to give everyone like an equal opportunity.
Yes, that's equal opportunity. I am stressing equal opportunity, you are stressing equal outcomes. Equal opportunity means we only accept the people who perform the best by metrics, period.
See, I don't think that black people and Hispanics growing up get equal opportunity as compared to whites and Asian Americans.
Really? So you believe that Latin American, what's Latin Americans? Because Latin America is still, so Latin American Americans, what's the term we should use? Mexican Americans, Latin American Americans? You believe that they have faced more systemic discrimination in the United States than Asian Americans?
I mean,
because I look at them, and here's one thing that's really important to me. I look at Asian Americans who are citizens who were put in internment camps wrongfully. I look at Chinese immigrants who wanted to migrate here legally and could not for decades. And I look at Mexican Americans who come here illegally and then are granted amnesty. And I see that as a much greater advantage than an Asian American who is not even one generation removed from an internment camp or barred from migrating to the country. It doesn't seem to me that's very fair.
I just think that I guess Asian Americans don't face, like you said, like as much systemic inequalities than like blacks or Hispanics, because even like whenever you want to get a job or you're getting, I don't know, you want to like and you want to interview for like a position, within 10 seconds, like if the interviewer sees that like you're black or you're Hispanic, like they can have this bias towards you.
And you don't believe that applies towards Asians?
I think that they actually have a positive bias.
Okay, well I can tell you where they don't, and applying to college.
You see, but
So you were talking about, first off, potential anecdotal situations that you believe, and it's not supported by data, you believe that when interviewing for job interviews, Latin Americans or Black Americans might be viewed unfavorably. Let me just do some yes or no real quick. I want to make sure I understand your position here, okay? Because I want to see where we disagree. It seems to me you were saying that you believe when applying for a job, a Black American or a Latin American may face some personal discrimination that an Asian American wouldn't.
yes.
Yes, okay, yes, you believe that. Okay. There is no empirical evidence to support that. Now, let me respond with, I would present you an example where Asian Americans absolutely do face systemic observable discrimination on a level not seen by Black or Latin Americans, and that's when applying for college. It's not a maybe, it's we know that they're discriminated against.
Well, I mean,
Is that seems right?
I mean, if I can't really answer in a yes or no question because you can't really like explain what you mean by like yes and no. So
Okay, an Asian American right now can apply to the exact same university, apply right here. They have to score higher on standardized testing and they have to have better performance, more extracurriculars than a Black American. They will be discriminated against because they are Asian American and they have to work harder to get into college.
Well, they're not being discriminated against. The other like ethnicity group is given like, it's not like, again, it's not like UT is discriminating against whites or Asians.
Yes, and Harvard is specifically, that's the lawsuit. Yes, they are. That's my point. Yes, they are.
I don't see it as like discrimination towards them. Like I don't see it as like reverse racism or like whatever.
I didn't say reverse racism.
I know, but like
It's racism. To say to an Asian, you have to get a 1350 on an SAT, and then say to a Black person, you only need an 1100, that's racism.
See, I don't agree with that. Like for me, it's like also.
Can you understand why I see that as racism and many Asian Americans would see it as racism?
I can see the point, and like maybe affirmative action needs, I guess, improvement, and like they need to institute like a different kind of policy that kind of benefits everybody and not just like ethnic minorities that are disadvantaged.
Huh.
But
that's interesting. How would you implement that? Like what kind of as opposed to affirmative action now, which is based on race. It's interesting. Let's explore that. What do you think would be the best way to do it?
I think that we need to focus on, like, how you were talking about single-parent households and, like, all that growing up. I think that education systems do a poor job of educating kids. Even, like, in public schools, elementary schools, teachers don't, like, they need to realize that sometimes those kids at home don't have value systems, moral systems implemented, like, in their, I guess, household. So they need to be aware of that and implement.
So I want to make sure I understand. You're saying that Black Americans and Latin American Americans don't have values instilled in them in their households?
No, it's not that. It's that, like,
okay.
How you were talking about single-parent households and how some, like, that's a big determining factor of, like, economic status and all
right.
that. Well, then that also can determine how, like, obviously how kids grow up and whether they have, like, whether they face, like, abuse at home or whether they face, like, emotional, like, problems and all of that. Like, that needs to be taken into account too. Like,
so in other
schools.
words, you would like to see a system where, let's say, a white, I can say this because I'm white trailer park kid who doesn't have a dad and has an abusive mother who went to a really crappy school in a rural area should be admitted before a Mexican-American immigrant whose family is very wealthy.
I don't think that they should be admitted before. I think that, like, public schools need to change, like, their way of, I guess, teaching, especially like in elementary school where, like, the mind of, like, the child can be framed or, like, changed, like, different ways that they view like
I'm asking about you saying changing affirmative action. It sounded like you were talking about changing it to socioeconomic status rather than race. No? You still think it should be race?
I don't think that I think that it should be like something more towards socioeconomic status because
Okay.
like that's because sometimes affirmative action doesn't even benefit like disadvantaged African Americans. It benefits people African Americans that
Or
are, like,
disadvantaged white Americans.
yeah, exactly.
Or disadvantaged Asian Americans.
Exactly. So if we're talking about like disadvantaged people in general, I think that affirmative action should shift towards like the not necessarily like you said race, but more towards economic status and
Right.
and
So we should have lower standards, for example, for let's say an Asian American or a white American poor child from a single parent household than a wealthy Mexican immigrant from a dual parent household. So you're different socioeconomic status. We would give the preferential treatment to the Asian or the white person in that case.
I mean, I would say so just because they grew up in a disadvantaged way, so they won't have better education than that like wealthy person, Mexican immigrant.
Right. Okay. So you believe that we should change affirmative action from race-based to socioeconomic-based?
Yes.
Okay. And then we could look at fixing socioeconomic problems, like doing away with welfare completely, so that we actually start de-incentivizing single-parent households.
I agree with that. Yeah.
We agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I know that. I know a lot of Latin American. Can I say Mexican American? Is that allowed? Okay,
Yeah.
because YouTube says that Mexican is a pejorative. So I can say Mexican American. It's not offensive.
No.
So because yeah, I know.
sensitive.
Yeah, I know Mexican American households. Place a strong importance often on family values, and have big families, and often have mothers and fathers.
I have like 50 cousins.
Oh, do you? Yeah, exactly. Do they all live in like the same house with like 9 trucks in the driveway?
I mean, they used to like my mom. She has like 7 siblings, and they all used to like live together. And like when, because I'm like one of the youngest cousins.
Yeah.
But when she had like my older brother that's like 30 something, and all of those like they all used to live together. And
So all the cars in the driveway and on the I know there are areas in Texas where you're just like, okay, this is clearly a Mexican area because there's like 50 cars out in front of this house. Okay, well I understand that, and I do understand too that many Mexican Americans who come here and want to work hard, have a problem with the welfare system as it exists, and I think we would find some common ground on that,
for sure.
because often many Mexican Americans don't benefit from those same welfare programs, sometimes culturally because of a sense of pride and they want to work for it, but it could be argued a correlation between that and stronger family households with Mexican American family immigrants, and that's why I think that maybe you see, for example, yourself, were your parents first generation or are you first generation Mexican immigrant?
Me.
Okay, so you came here. So there is actually a statistic, it's kind of interesting, that Mexican American immigrants, first generation, their children do better than with Black Americans, immigrants, or Black Americans, even born here, than their next generation does. And again, that could largely be attributed to strong families, which a big part of that is that isn't this.
Which kind of goes back to my point of like having those like because you said single parent households that they increase from like 20% to 80.
Yeah, in Black American households. Yeah.
Yeah, and Mexican Americans like tend to put a like focus on family values. So I think that's also why like personally I grew up kind of very like driven, and I think that like you said, that's a very like determining factor in trying to like institute policies in schools that kind of not improves that, but has like teachers aware of like different problems that these kids can face, and have like a general way to like teach kids that is more nurturing.
The problem with it is it would be seen as judgmental, right? Right now we can't teach people that a mommy and a daddy are the best way to raise children because some people get offended, even though we know that would have. Let me ask you this. When you list, because you mentioned affirmative action, and I don't know whether you have or haven't benefited, when you think of all of your privileges in your life, and I think of all of my privileges, and I don't mean in the sense of white privilege, I just mean privileges, blessings. When you think of them, can you think of anything that has benefited you more in molding and shaping who you are than having a mom and a dad?
No.
It's probably one of the biggest determining factors.
Yeah, for sure.
So what I'm saying is, rather than viewing things through the prism of race on campus after the problem, let's try and focus on that, and I think we'll have better outcomes across the board.
I agree. I mean, yeah.
I think we disagree on some, but I'm glad that we could agree in spirit on that.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. So, Ale?
Ali, yeah.
Ale. I was so close. Thank you, Ali. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. God bless.
Hey there, YouTube viewer. If you like this installment of Change My Mind, click on one of these other installments, Playing in a Box. It's the only way you can find it, because if you search it, it may not show up because it's controversial, and YouTube wants to discourage that. The controversy. To Change My Mind. Playing by the rules. We just don't know what they are. subscribe and hit notifications.